Negotiations to end Russia's war against Ukraine have stalled, and the United States of America has withdrawn from its role as a mediator. Donald Trump blamed the president of Ukraine for the breakdown of the negotiations. As a result, while President Zelensky is trying to reach out to the White House. The Financial Times writes that the U.S. peace campaign to end the Russian Federation's war against Ukraine is fading as American President Donald Trump is losing interest in negotiations and his war against Iran is weakening the pressure on Russia. According to 4 European Union diplomats involved in negotiations with Ukraine, the conflict in the Middle East has completely diverted Washington's attention from reaching a peace agreement. At the same time, this benefits Russia due to high oil prices, the suspension of U.S. sanctions, and rapid depletion of American munitions needed by the Ukrainian armed forces. In addition, Trump also lifted sanctions on Russian oil and hints that he might not reinstate them, even after the war in the Middle East. I'm Alexei Pechi. Let's discuss this together. But before we start this episode, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, like the episode, leave any comment under this video, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel Pechi News. The link is in the description. So, the other day, Donald Trump firmly rejected help from Ukraine in intercepting Iranian drones in the Middle East, stating, quote, "The last person we need help from is Zelensky." And right after that, Trump lashed out at Zelensky with criticism and said that it was Zelensky who disrupted the peace talks. And if it weren't for him, Russia's war against Ukraine would supposedly have been stopped, since Vladimir Putin was allegedly ready to end the war a long time ago. Zelensky responded by saying that the Russians are deliberately stalling and disrupting any agreements. For example, according to Zelensky, the return of the assistant to the bold Russian dictator, Vladimir Medinsky, to the process of ending the war shows the true attitude of the Russians toward negotiations. Let me remind you that Medinsky is a nobody, just some random guy, and usually at negotiations he just tells some historical fables. He talks there about Kievan Rus, about the Ruriks, and so on. Well, basically the same thing Putin does. So this shows that the Kremlin has, in a way, spat in the Americans' faces. But let me quote Zelensky, "Medinsky's return is simply a demonstration of their attitude. It's just a move, but it doesn't mean Medinsky will be there all the time. They just showed their attitude after certain events. We take it calmly." This is more to show the American side who and what is really dragging things out. In addition, Zelensky stated that there is a need for a personal meeting with his American counterpart Donald Trump because of issues that are at a standstill. As Zelensky noted, the negotiating teams of Ukraine and the US are discussing a wide range of issues, particularly regarding sanctions pressure. At the same time, he noted that he did not discuss the issue of sanctions against the Russian Federation or their easing with Trump. Here is a quote from Zelensky. "I think we have a lot of issues both with negotiations with drones and with the Middle East. I think we need to meet directly with President Trump because the teams are working, but we have some issues that are at a standstill. Our teams need to work harder." Next is a quote from Zelensky. Let me remind you, Trump previously stated that the United States is temporarily, I emphasize temporarily, easing some of the sanctions against Russia. Next is a quote from Zelensky. "The rise in energy prices is due to the conflict around Iran." And today Trump announced that he decided to temporarily ease some of the sanctions against Russian oil due to the sharp rise in global prices. According to him, and I quote, "This is for the whole world." And he added, quote, "The sanctions imposed after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 will return as soon as the crisis is over. That is, if the crisis continues, then the sanctions will not be in effect for 6 months." Although earlier, let me remind you, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright, and even the State Department stated that the sanctions would be lifted for only a month. Don't get the wrong idea. Bessent said, "Don't get the wrong idea, this is temporary. We'll lift them for about a month and Putin won't profit much." Trump says, "When the crisis ends, maybe we'll restore the sanctions." As a result, next is a quote from Zelensky. "The U.S. campaign to end Russia's war against Ukraine is fading as American President Donald Trump loses interest in negotiations, and his war against Iran weakens the pressure on Russia. According to European officials, negotiations between Ukrainian and Russian officials mediated by the US are indeed at risk. И здесь напомню, что последний... Next is a quote from Zelensky. Another round, which was supposed to take place on March 5th in Abu Dhabi, was postponed on February 17th to 18th due to strikes by the US and Israel on Iran. Next is a quote, and here is what one of the EU diplomats said, quote, "The Middle East has seriously shifted political attention away from Ukraine. For us and for Ukraine, this is a disaster." According to diplomats, EU countries were informed that deliveries of American weapons, particularly air defense systems, would be delayed because Washington has prioritized clients from the Middle East, which has serious consequences for Ukraine. In addition, Trump's war with Iran gave Russia an unexpected advantage by causing a rise in global energy prices, which helped the Kremlin earn additional revenues of up to $150 million a day. Next is a quote from the Russian Federation and pressure on India, which was previously urged not to buy Russian oil. And it's also important to note that the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin has so far mostly refrained from criticizing Trump over the war with Iran, probably trying not to make the US decisively support Ukraine. Trump and Putin had a phone conversation on Monday, March 9th, and the head of the Kremlin suggested ways in which Russia could help end the conflict in the Middle East. However, during talks with Ukraine, the Kremlin... Here's a quote, and unfortunately the negotiations are really losing their momentum. EU leaders are skeptical that peace talks will be successful without additional pressure on Moscow, but they see this process as a way to keep the US involved. European leaders have worked to keep Ukraine in focus since the US-Israeli war began. Next is a quote. French President Emmanuel Macron met with Zelensky in Paris on Friday, March 13th. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz visited the White House 3 days after the US and Israel began strikes on Iran. And let me remind you, Merz brought a map of Ukraine with him at that time to justify the need to increase pressure on Moscow. However, as the Financial Times writes, Trump was not inclined to detailed discussions and still believes that Russia is strong and Ukraine is weak. Next is a quote from Zelensky. Putin. Trump is sure that Ukraine just needs to be forced to surrender and then the war will be over. I'll answer that the whole Trump team. Next is a quote from Zelensky, and now a quote from the Financial Times.
Американские чиновники были заинтересованы в том, чтобы поспособствовать прекращению войны, но в основном относились безразлично к условиям, на которых эта война может завершиться. Но также я бы сказал, что не видно никакого смысла проводить переговоры в ближайшее время, потому что там не о чем говорить. Ну давайте быть объективными, не о чем.
Next is a quote that the negotiation team of Kirilo Budanov, the head of the president's office, decided to take a maximum of 2 more weeks, after which a decision will be made to announce a protracted war. Next is a quote from Zelensky. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. In addition, if you found this episode interesting or useful, you can support the work of this YouTube channel with your donation or your subscription. All the links and details on how to do this are in the description of this video, or you can use the QR code. That's the most convenient option. I will be grateful for any support you can give. Next is a quote from Zelensky. Goodbye, everyone.